In today's tutorial, I'm going to take you step by step through the process of rendering this fancy doorknob. You'll learn how to create anisotropic metals, brushed textures, and knurling using displacement, as well as a bit of lighting technique. You can download the model from my file vault for free, linked below. All right, the first step is to import our 3D model, and I'll take the default import settings, except for I have the tessellation set to 0.3 instead of 0.2. This gives us a little more detail to work with on smaller scale objects. I will say I also have a photo reference here. This is essentially the same product I modeled. The door handle is from a company called Buster and Punch that I really like, and it's nice to have a good photo reference because it's going to allow us to understand what details we need to add and give us a benchmark to reach for. So back in KeyShot, if we notice our camera's not rotating around the object we want to focus on, it can be a little annoying. So I'll start by clicking the part I want the camera to rotate around, then right click and choose Set Camera Target. We can choose a point, a model, or a part. And right now, since the handle is selected, if I click on this piece here with part selected, it should center that object in the middle of our camera frame. So I'll hit OK. And now when I rotate, we are indeed focused on this part of the handle. Very good. Now, before I proceed, I will also switch from CPU rendering mode into GPU rendering mode. You don't have to do this, but I've been finding pretty good results with GPU rendering lately, and I have a pretty fast GPU on this computer. It's an RTX 3090, I think. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and apply some materials. But before we do that, let's go ahead and set up our camera. And also, I'm not sure this aspect ratio complements this handle shape very well. So go to my image and let's go ahead and do landscape 16:9. All right. I'm seeing a lot of extreme kind of distortion on this, which I don't like. So I'll change this from 50, which is my camera's perspective, to 100, which will give me more of an orthographic looking shot, less distortion, give us a nice kind of a diagonal composition. And that's good enough for now. I'm gonna go to my camera tab and just lock that down by creating a new camera. Now, if I navigate away from this position, if I move to the free camera, then back to camera 1, it will snap back to that position. And that more or less matches my photo reference. So I can use this to kind of go back and forth. Now, the next thing I want to point out is, especially on this photo reference, it's a very shiny object. This is a metallic object, and that means it's going to be what we call fully specular. So it's going to reflect light substantially. And for this to look right and for our materials to look right, the lighting has to be correct. If we proceed with our startup lighting environment that we have right here, which is a white and gray, very soft environment, we're not going to get the nice reflections and highlights on our product the way we want. So we need to fix this. The first thing I'll do is go to my environments and I will choose something like one of these HDRIs that are built in here. One of them is I think they're both warehouses. They have different looks. I think I'll go with this one for now. Also, I will toggle my KeyShot window to make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so from here, we're getting a lot of color from our HDRI, and we don't want that. This is a very cool HDRI, and if I'm getting blue light on a product that's gonna be mostly yellow or gold or brass in color, it's gonna create some issues. So let's go to the HDRI editor and take our saturation down substantially. I'll cut it in half, and that should take most of the noticeable color out of the HDRI. We could go further if you really wanted to. Maybe just when we're crafting the materials, we'll just take it down to 0 for now, and then we can reintroduce that color when we're ready to render. I'll go ahead and refresh that HDRI, and the next thing that we want to do is jump into our materials. So we have a number of materials, and if we look on the photo reference, it's all basically the same type of material, which we call anisotropic. And what that refers to is these types of reflections that we get with the brushed metal. So that's what we're going to be setting up. Okay, so I actually want to start off not with the knurling, but this kind of boring part right here. Once we understand how to make this anisotropic part or material look correct, we're going to reuse it on a lot of other parts of this model. So let's start off with that. I'll double click this gray part here and we'll open up the material graph. Now it is a diffuse material. Let's change it to anisotropic. We'll go ahead and take the diffuse color to black because we know that this is a metal and metals are fully specular, which means they don't need a diffuse property here. Now let's take the specular value and choose something that looks kind of bronze yellowish. We're going to change that in a bit, so this is fine, close enough. I want to at least describe how this works. Right now we can see the reflection of our HDRI when I take the roughness X and Y down to 0, so there's no roughness, it's perfectly smooth. And there is a stair-stepping going on in that reflection. That's actually because the HDRI we're using is only 3000 pixels wide, so it's not that big. Higher resolution HDRI would be better, but in this case, it won't matter. Now let's take the roughness X up and watch what happens to those reflections. You'll notice that they start to kind of stretch out left to right. If we take the roughness Y up, it's going to do the exact opposite. It's going to stretch this direction, up and down. The way anisotropy works is, if we look at our reference photo, there's a brushing pattern or a surface abrasion that's going around the cylinder, and the reflection is getting stretched left to right. So we're going to simulate that. That tells us we want more roughness in our x-axis. So I'll start off with, say, 0.1, and then for the roughness y, we'll do about 1/10 of that, which is 0.01 for now. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll leave our mode set to linear for our anisotropy, but we're actually going to use a different version on the end where it's green. So if you want to take the most direct path to learning KeyShot, then check out my KeyShot Rendering Masterclass. It's already helped hundreds of others level up, including designers from Nike, Dell, Logitech, Sonos, Garmin, Trek, Pepsi, and lots of others. See, I designed the KeyShot Rendering Masterclass to be the most comprehensive course available while still making it super easy to understand. And what makes it different is the unique combination of bite-sized, feature-based videos coupled with follow-along, project-based lessons. This course will help you build an intuitive understanding of how KeyShot works. Then you'll be able to create and explore within KeyShot without getting bogged down by the technical aspects of the software. My goal is to help you convert your ideas to digital images. When you enroll, you'll get access to over 100 video lessons, quizzes, an active comments section, private Discord server channel, and project files to maximize your learning. So check out the link in the description below to learn more. I hope to see you there. So to get our texture, we're gonna right click, go to textures, and I want the brushed radial. This has no seams, it's a 3D procedural texture, and we're gonna plug it into the specular socket of the anisotropic material. Now you'll notice that the texture is not aligned correctly. So if I zoom on out, you can see it's applied to a couple surfaces on our model. And if we double click on this, we go to move texture. We don't even see our texture locator for whatever reason. I'm having issues with KeyShot being buggy, so when I click on this part button here, well, it worked now. Sometimes this doesn't work, so if that doesn't work, you can click on that button here. So it looks like our tool, our move tool is now aligned with the cylinder, but it's not rotated in the right direction. So this concentric circle brushed radial pattern, the center of it is aligned with the green axis or the green arrow. That's typical of most 3D procedurals in KeyShot that have an axis, I guess, like a center. So I'm gonna start to rotate it by grabbing this red circle and holding shift and let go when it gets to the 90 degree mark. Now at first this looks pretty good, but if we scale this down, you'll start to notice something. Let's go all the way down to say 10. You'll see the chamfered edge here kind of has some weird markings on it. Well, we're not entirely lined up with this. So if we look at a side angle, we can see that we're really off axis here. And sometimes if you expand the angle in this drop-down menu, you can center it on the part. For whatever reason, it looks like it's trying to locate this texture between this gray part back here and this one up here. We don't want that, so I'm gonna go ahead and align it with the shaft of the handle a little bit better. This is a very non-scientific way to do this. If your materials are all separated out right, this shouldn't happen, but I may have made an error there. So if that's the case, sorry about that. That's looking pretty good though. So at this point, we just need to address the color, right? When we look at this, the brushing is coming from the black and white values within this procedural texture. So let's change them to a more appropriate color. All I do typically is I look at the reference photo and I try to take my best guess. You can try the color picker, that can sometimes help. So if I grab this color picker, well, I would need to move it off screen to do that. But anyway, to save us some time, I have saved the colors that I liked earlier, and that's mostly because I don't see color very well. So it can take me a while to pick the right colors. So in this case, I've got basically like a darker tan and like a lighter tan / yellow color. And then the other thing that you may find yourself wanting to do with this anisotropic material, if we look here in the reference photo, this is a lot brighter and more yellow. This one over here looks a little more brown. Sometimes taking the diffuse and not making it black, but a little bit of a lighter color will increase the dark, lighten those dark reflections. So sometimes I set this to about 10%. We can dial in the color here in a little bit, but if you're concerned about that, we can go and maybe saturate these just a little bit. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. The rest of this is probably going to come down to lighting, so keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to getting the surface to look a little more rough, we can take our texture and also use it as a bump texture. And because it's so small, we're going to want to take that bump height and increase it. So if I take it from 0.5 to, say, 1 or 2 or 3, we'll start to see those grooves, and they'll kind of mess with the reflections, and that's kind of what we're wanting here. So that's not too bad. If it still looks too glossy, you can always increase that anisotropic roughness. So I could go from, say, 0.1 to, say, 0.15 or 0.2. And then, again, I just usually increase the roughness in the opposite direction by the same amount. So that's good enough for now. The next thing we want to do is take care of this little green part down here. So if I hold Shift and left-click to copy this, I can Control-Shift right-click to paste it on the green part, but it does so as a copy. So that means that this material here and this material here, they're not linked. And the reason is because when I linked them, they were very off-center. So for whatever reason, I need to take this green material and go into this brush radial texture, hit Move Texture, and I want to center it on the part once again, but that leaves it off-center. What I can do is maybe try this under this angle. Let's see what happens when I take the center X down to 0. That might help. So that looks to have aligned it in the middle, which is good. So we'll go ahead and take that. I will say, to get that familiar sort of reflection, anisotropic reflection that you're used to seeing, that kind of pizza slice swirl, we need to do something else. If we go to this brush radial, we need to make, this anisotropic material, we need to make the mode from linear to radial. And then that should give us what we want. So if I hit position texture, we should be able to click on the middle. There we go. Let's just move this guy on over. We can actually take the bump down, the bump height on this one, since we don't need it. I'll uncheck sync and I'll take that bump height down to, say, 0.1. So now we're just relying on the roughness to drive the look of it. All right, now let's tackle the knurling. So if we look at our reference image here, we can see all these little diamond patterns. That's what we're going to put in on the handle. So let's double click it. And before we actually apply the texture, we're going to reuse the material we just created. Shift left click to copy this material. Control Shift right click to paste it on the handle. All right, double click it one more time, and then we're going to get into the material graph. From here, we're going to go ahead and displace the surface and play around with our roughness values a bit. Now, I created a custom knurling texture for this, which I'm including for free. Drag that on in. It's called knurl PNG1. Maybe in another tutorial, I'll go into how I created this texture. It was kind of a pain in the butt, which is why I'm not showing you how I did it in this tutorial. But comment down below if you really want to know how to make custom displacement textures. From here, we're going to take this into a new node called a geometry displace. We're going to connect these two sockets, and we're going to connect the displace to the geometry socket of the root node. Double click the displace node, and we want to make sure we change the displacement height from 100 to 1. And we want to take our texture and make sure it's mapped correctly. So hit C after selecting it to get a preview. It's obviously not working here, so let's change it from box mapping to cylinder, because this indeed is a cylinder. Now we want to scale this down because it's really big. So we'll change it to scene units, and I'll drag the size down. I want to drag this down until we start to see the pattern repeating a little bit. All right, now it looks like it's oriented the wrong direction for sure. So I'm going to rotate it, And we're gonna do that using this angle UV. Let's type in 90. And it's also looking like it's kind of got a seam right here, which I don't like. So let's hit Move Texture, and we'll center it on Part, and we're looking quite a bit better. That also scaled it appropriately too. Now I want to rotate this around so that seam is out of our sight. There, very good. And that's good, but we do need to bring it down quite a ways. It's not that big. The knurling should be pretty small. Let's start with this and see how this goes. So if I were to go ahead and get out of here, the way displacement works actually is the white will be pushed out and the black will be pushed in. And if we look at our reference photo, you might notice that our texture map is actually inverted. We actually want the dark parts to stick out and the light parts to go away. So what we can do is either play with the displacement height, or we can play with the texture itself. And we're going to go ahead and select this connector and do a utilities color invert. And now if we preview that, that will invert our texture for us. Now when we hit the execute geometry node button, we should see after a little bit, all those surface gets pushed out. So we got a few issues, but it's at least working correctly. Now I'll hit the H key to bring up the heads up display. You'll see we have 206,000 triangles. If I disable this and hit the geometry node button again, we only have 76,000 tries in our scene. As we increase the detail, those triangles will go up, and that's something to consider if your computer is struggling there. We'll go ahead and enable this again. The way we fix some of the issues going on in here are in our displace node settings. So the first thing I want to do is make the triangle size quite a bit smaller. So instead of 1 millimeter, we're going to go down to 0.1 millimeters, and I'll hit execute geometry node again. There should be a shortcut. I think it's Alt G, maybe something like that. So we're looking a little bit better. A couple things to note though. These are a little big and they still lack a little bit of detail. So what we're going to do is do our best to eyeball the scale of the knurling against our reference. Looks like they're about twice as big as they should be. So let's go to our texture, and I will take the largest value and set it to 2.5 millimeters. Let's try that and just hit geometry node refresh. All right, we're looking quite good there. Another thing I'm noticing is that it looks like we're sticking out too far with our displacement. So let's go into displace. Let's try something like 0.5 millimeters. Let's give that a shot. So that's looking a little bit better. The next thing that I might do to kind of fix this is go back into displace, and this is up to you depending on your computer. If you're on a laptop and it doesn't have a ton of RAM, this may slow things down quite a bit, but we can take our max triangles. Notice it says 6, this is 6 million, so just be careful. Maybe I double this to 12 and execute one more time and see if this cleans up. We're looking to smooth the surface out a little bit more with some more resolution. At this point, we have 10 million triangles in our scene, which is not terrible. I mean, it's a lot, but you know, there's a lot of little detail, so I'm not too surprised by that. I might want to go just a little bit higher, and what I could do is leave that 12, maybe go about 14 or 15 max, and then cut down the size of triangle. Instead of 0.1, go to 0.05. Execute this one more time and see how this looks. And again, do all this based on how comfortable you feel with your own computer. All right, well, that's pretty good for now. The next issue that we're going to address is the edge that's not matching up. We're gonna fix that. If I zoom back out, let's just make sure that we at least have our texture looking roughly the way it should. I think it's pretty good. The knurling, again, I mean, maybe it could be stretched a little bit in one of these axes. I could try that. Let me see what happens. So if I unconstrain this and make this instead of 2.5, maybe I make it like 2.75. Let's go ahead and see how that looks. I think that looks a little bit better, a little bit closer. Looks like we could stretch it even further if we wanted to, but you can do that on your own if that's what you want to do. The next thing to point out is that if we zoom out of our reference photo, the handle looks a lot more rough than the rest of the model, whereas ours looks too shiny at this moment. So we want to address that for sure. And the easy thing is we can go into our anisotropic material and we can make the roughness at X and Y a lot closer together, and we can increase them. So let's take the roughness X to say 0.3, and then let's take the roughness Y to something like 0.03. Not too bad. That way we still have our reflections. Looks like we can go higher on that roughness, maybe 0.35 0.5 or 0.4. The other thing that is going on here is with KeyShot, as far as the way the rendering is going, multiple surface scattering helps with conservation of energy, and that should mean the surface gets a lot brighter when it's very rough. I'm not sure that's happening to this material. So we can fake that by actually going into the color. So let's put a node in between the specular value, utilities, and color adjust. Let's just take the value of this up from 1 to say 1.1, 1.2, 1.5 maybe. It's maybe a little bit bright, but I think that's okay. And then let's take the saturation down a bit, go to 0.9. So then if we look at this, it's gonna look a lot closer to the handle here. I think that's pretty good. We could probably even drop the actual displacement height a little bit. These still look a little bit aggressive, these triangles. So I'm gonna bring this down to say 0.35. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that made a pretty big difference. Let's see, I think that's pretty good overall. Now we want to address the edges right here where the knurling's not matching up. This is an easy fix, but it's maybe not very intuitive. What we're gonna do is get a right click, go to textures and color gradient. We're gonna use a color gradient to change the displacement height. So we'll hit C on the node to preview it. And what we wanna do is move our texture. Let's make sure it's centered on part again. And I'm going to scale it down quite a bit so we can see how it's laid out. Looks like we need to adjust it. So what I want to do is go to move texture, and I want the black to be on either side. So I'm gonna hold shift to snap to 90. There we go. And instead of fading from white to black, we're gonna go from black to white, then back to black. So if I grab this white and I drag it to the right, we're gonna make that transition a lot more harsh. Let's add another stop by double clicking, and add one more by double clicking, and set the one on the far left, double click that, and set it to black. And we're gonna bring these two dots or color stops together to sharpen those transitions. Once we have this looking pretty good, we can actually just scale the thing up, which is cool. So take our scale and start to increase this to push it out toward the edges. We wanna get black at the very edges and white in the middle. And here's a little trick too. If we need to stretch this out, we can do this. And this is going to give us more control over sharpening those edges, or the transitions, I'm sorry. So grab the black and bring it in toward the white, and do that on the other side, which we'll do here. So it should definitely be pure black and then fade to white. And the closer you can get those, the better they'll look. All right, so after all that, we'll shrink this back down, get out of that color gradient. And all we need to do is do a color composite with our texture. So grab the connector, going into displace, go to utilities, color composite. The color gradient goes into the background, double click color composite. You can preview. And when we go from blend mode, from normal to multiply, we're darkening those edges. Remember, black is not going to get pushed off of the surface. So let's get out of this preview. Let's zoom into the edge. And we're going to refresh our node and see how this looks. Pretty cool, huh? So now we're fading this knurling effect on both sides, and it's looking a lot more seamless. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier on, this is silly, we should go ahead and put rounded edges on this whole model, because I didn't model all the fillets, and with metal stuff, you certainly should have rounded edges. So let's grab our whole model and take our radius under the scene tree to 0.1 millimeters and hit enter. It might take a minute to compute. Once it does, we should see a little highlight on the edges of these rounded edges. Hopefully we don't freeze. There we go. Took a minute. Should have done that first. Sorry about that. You can go 0.1 or maybe 0.15 or something like that, make them a little bit bigger, but that will help also break up some of the reflections here. Okay, so looking at our reference photo, again, we can tweak some of these colors. I know they're off a bit right now. We'll come back to that. Let's get the materials blocked in first, and then we'll do that. And luckily, the rest of this is pretty simple. So let's reuse this material here. So I'm going to shift left click on this to copy it, and then control shift right click to paste it as a copy. The reason we do that, again, is because we need to orient it correctly along this 90 like this cylinder is 90 degrees to this one, perpendicular, so we need to adjust the texture accordingly. So if we go into the material graph of this piece, hit C to preview, these brushing marks are wrong. So we want to move the texture, and we want to basically rotate it 90 degrees, and that will fix that issue. Get out of that preview, and we're good to go there. That means we can shift left click to copy this, shift right click to paste it linked onto this piece here, because they're going to be the same. And technically, we could probably reuse it on this piece back here. So shift, actually we're going to, because this one needs to be radial, we need to, let's go ahead and use this one. Shift left click this guy, control shift right click on the back piece here. So we got a lot of distracting stuff going on. We're going to hold Alt and left click this back plate here. Let's fix the orientation of this texture. Go to the material graph and double click on this. We're going to move texture, and remember the green is pointing forward, so we want to rotate that so it faces forward. Much better. The other thing we got to fix is we need that radial. Oh, looks like we're already good there. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we should be able to see when we rotate our lighting, we should get some anisotropic reflections. If we rotate around our environment, we should see that things are looking correct. Let's just double check that. Position texture. Yeah, see, it wasn't quite aligned, so I wasn't seeing those pizza slices. Let's see if we can fix that. Just move it on over. And let's make sure this guy might need to move forward. Yeah, see how the green wasn't pointing forward toward the camera? We weren't getting our pizza slice reflections. Now we're doing better. I think we might need to fix that on the other part too, actually, right? So if I right click, show all parts, double click this guy, I think that's wrong. Let's check it out. So if we go here and change the anisotropic, radial, position texture, yeah, see the green part I don't think is where it should be. Let's move this guy back. Let's move the green part forward. Boom, come on. Now we're getting that iconic proper reflection. Now, we could copy that and put it on this little guy, but if you look at the reference, it's actually just a flat brush surface. So I thought it'd be good to mix it up and take direction from that. So here's what we're gonna do. We're still going to use the same material. I'll shift left click back here, control shift right click to paste linked, or sorry, paste as a copy, but then we're gonna go in and replace this texture. So double click this guy, go to your material graph. We're gonna use the normal brushed, and we're gonna pop that into here. Let me go ahead and copy these. So I'm gonna save these to my library. Sorry, that's off screen. I'm gonna save these to the library, these two. And we're gonna populate the brushed texture with those two colors. Not sure my color picker keeps popping up off screen. Sorry about that. So all we're gonna do is plug this into specular, and let's preview it with C. Maybe I should have left one of these black for now so we can see it more easily. Let's scale it down to about 10. Oh, it's way too big. Let's go to 1. And let's go ahead and increase the length. And you can customize these a little bit, but I think this is fine as it is. We're gonna go ahead and move and say fit to part. We're just gonna rotate this guy at kind of a random looking angle. And then we'll bring this black color back to whatever I had before, this darker. There we go. Then we can plug this into bump 2. We get out of there. We can also, I think we need to increase the roughness of this quite a bit. So we can go into our anisotropic and go to like 0.3 and maybe like 0.01 or 0.03. I think that looks pretty good. And then as far as this wall, nothing special. I have a custom wall material, painted wall that I like to use. I think I'll do subtle texture. Let's try that. And that's about it. So now the last thing we need to do is kind of dial in our camera and our lighting and do a little bit of image processing here. And this won't take too long, but that's where we're gonna get this proper color, because right now this is too dark and it's too yellow looking. It's kind of brown looking, to be quite honest. So let's put those final touches on here and then we'll be done, ready for rendering. All right, and I will say this next part just comes down to some patience and depends on how picky you want to get if you're trying to match a photo reference. I do want to make my camera match the angle a little bit more. I think that's kind of important here. And then I'll go ahead and update my camera. I'm not going to bother with depth of field quite yet. Let's worry about the lighting. So in the environment tab, we can rotate our environment by holding control and left click and dragging. And I usually like to do this just to see if I can get some better reflections. So I want the brightest parts of this HDRI reflecting on our product here. so it's not so dark. I think that's a good starting point. And already that helps a lot. I think the other thing we want to do is light settings tab. I want to go into product mode, and that should help a little bit. If you're getting a lot of fireflies, you can also try interior mode. That tends to help with that as well. Just kind of depends on what your preference is, what looks better to you. And then I'm going to go to the image styles, and we're going to create a new image style, and we're going to go to photographic mode. This does a couple things. Yes, it makes it look a little more gray, but we are clamping the highlights so they're not getting to be too bright, which was kind of an issue. This also helps with the color. It desaturates it a little bit. What I want to do is take that exposure and increase it a fair bit. So we're brightening up the overall image, and I'll bring in a little bit of contrast here. And already that's helping quite a bit. We can see our knurling's probably a little too bright now, but we can come back and fix that. I think the overall colors everywhere else is pretty good, but if you're not sure about that, we can always go into the color and we can take the vibrance down a little bit. Vibrance targets more more red hues, whereas saturation just drops the overall color. So let's leave saturation alone, and let's just bring the vibrance down just a touch. Minus 0.2 maybe. And also if you're still dealing with a lot of noise, we've got denoise we can use, which is great. Let's set this to 0.2 or 0.3. If we go too high, we're going to lose detail in this knurling pattern. So I don't know, maybe I'll go 0.2. And then firefly, again, if you got white kind of noise, this will help. So I'll go 0.2, but too high with this value and you'll lose some specular highlights. So just keep that in mind. I mean, honestly, we could probably call it a day here right now. This looks very good, but there's a couple more adjustments I'd like to make. First of all, I'm going to go back into the anisotropic for the handle. And I want to go ahead and that color adjust. I think I made it too light. So I'm going to bring this from 1.5 down to 1.2 maybe. And the benefit of using a node like this is you can adjust it without going back and like overriding those original color values. I think the saturation's fine there. Maybe we can reduce the contrast just a little bit. I think overall that's pretty good. The other thing I wanted to adjust, I noticed, is this backplate looks like it's shinier in their version. So let's go ahead and look in the photo. So let's go in here and see how I have 0.4 and 0.015. Let's bring this down to 0.3 or even 0.2 maybe, and then bring this down to 0.005. Now, if we're losing too much of those iconic reflections, then we're just gonna have to increase the roughness. That's fine. I think I liked it at that higher value. Also, the lighting does affect that too. So you can play around with the orientation of your HDRI or add some extra pins if you want. I'll go 0.35. And lastly, if we wanted this kind of dark core reflection like they have on the bottom, we can do something with the HDRI. We can take our HDRI brightness and increase it a touch. And then we can also, we could blur it just a touch too, if you wanted a little bit of a softer look. And then if we want the dark floor, we gotta add a pin, drag it to the bottom. We'll make it black. From there, we want to make it large, and we need to make it set to alpha. So see how we have that core black reflection at the bottom now? That's pretty cool. Now, if you're worried or wondering why it's not going to the very bottom, it's probably because these doors that we have that are blocking them. So here's what I'm gonna do. In the geometry view, let's just grab those two doors. So let's grab the door and the other door, wherever that is. And let's go ahead and right-click Move Selection. If I move those up, notice if I move them out of the way, that black reflection is showing all the way under the bottom of the handle. So that tells me that the handle itself is reflecting this door, which is a little unfortunate. We just kind of have to live with that. So that's how it would look in real life. And that's fine. I think right now my handle's getting a little too washed out and light. It's not yellow enough. So I'm gonna go back in there and take this color adjust and see what happens without it. Maybe we just don't need it. I thought we did. Okay, we're gonna use it, but we're gonna use it very slightly. So let's bring this contrast back to 1, and let's bring that value to 1.1, and let's bring that saturation to, let's just leave it at 1. That's better, I think. So all we did was increase the brightness just a teensy bit. And honestly, that's it. Now you could go to town and keep playing around with different settings for the knurling or for the environment. Maybe in our image tab, we want a teeny little bit of bloom. Crank that, you get the, let's get this up. get those big soft glowing parts, and then increase the threshold so it only affects the brightest parts of the image, and then just kind of bring this back down so it's kind of thin. There we go. And then maybe this door needs to be just a little bit darker for some drama. Maybe I'm going to cool that off and go more cool and darker so this just kind of jumps off the page. I'm thinking that's the move. That'll also darken the reflection on the bottom there. All right, I decided this was enough for today's tutorial. However, after playing around for another hour or so, I added little details like scratches and smudges and even some dust particles to enhance the realism. So, I challenge you to see how far you can take your own rendering. Let me know on Instagram. And until next time, happy rendering.